That's what we're going to look at. All right. So we're going to jump right into the action. We're going to be all over the Gospels right now. So remember, the Gospels, the New Testament is the back 1/3 of your Bible. The Gospels are the first 4 books. Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. My dad always said that I had to take my Bible on dates because they had to climb over 4 fishermen, the 4 disciples. Kept the Bible in between me and my date. I didn't date a lot. I don't know why. Okay. So we're going to pick up the story. You can see it in Matthew 17, and we're also going to look at it in Mark. If you want to understand how the Gospels are put together, Mark has all of the action. It's the shortest Gospel, and it has every single miracle recorded. If you're reading through the New Testament with boys, start in Mark. Okay, and then Matthew is written from the perspective for the Jewish person. So they both include different things because they're writing to different audiences. So here's the story. Jesus is not with them. Jesus is up on this mountain, and he's separated the disciples. He has 3 with him. His 3, his guys, his closest guys. James, John, and Peter. They're with Jesus. And so that leaves 9. So does anybody already see how stuff can get in there? The 9 weren't picked to go with Jesus. How would you be feeling? They're up on the mountain, and down at the bottom of the mountain, a crowd has formed. The 9 are there. And what we know from reading through the story is that there's learned men in the crowd. We're not just collecting the riffraff anymore. Jesus is causing such a ruckus that now the Pharisees are coming out to see for themselves what's going on. So it refers to them as learned men and scholars of the law, which probably means Sadducees and Pharisees. The 9 disciples fail at casting out the demon. That's something we know. But that we also know that they have been given the authority to cast out demons and have already done it. If you need to know where that happened, you can write down Matthew 10:1 and Mark 6:13. So Jesus comes down. There's a big crowd. They're arguing. There's an argument going on. Did you guys see that? There's an arguing. And Jesus walks up. And the disciples are arguing with the Pharisees, and he asks, what is all this arguing about? Notice, none of the disciples answer. A man from the crowd who turns out to be the father of the demon-possessed boy answers Jesus. Jesus rebukes the perverse and wicked generation for the lack of faith. He then casts out the demon, and later the disciples ask him, why couldn't we do it? And Jesus says, you didn't have enough faith. So why is this story included in the Bible? It certainly doesn't cast a favorable light on the disciples. Why is it here? What message is God trying to get to us? When we hear the story as children, who do we identify with? The child. So that when we hear it as little kids, this story is all about Jesus healing the kid. But then we can grow up with this story and see that Jesus was teaching a ton of stuff on multiple layers. This story is all about power and faith. You know why the Sadducees and the Pharisees were there? Because Jesus had some sort of power that they didn't have, and it was starting to really anger them. When you're reading your Bible in 3D, you can come to these difficult passages, and when you don't understand what's going on and the story feels really awkward, slow down, reread, and pay attention to your surroundings. What comes before and what comes after this story? So Jesus and the 3 leave the 9 and they go up on the mountain. And what happens up there? The transfiguration. Big giant church words for God allowing the three that were there to see Jesus in his unveiled glory. So he's like glowing like fluorescent. Okay, and he's standing there talking to who? Moses and Elijah. Don't you want to know? I want to know. And what I'm going to ask when I get there is, how did Peter, John, and James know that that was Moses and Elijah? I want to know. Well, Moses, maybe he was stuttering. I don't know. Elijah, big hair. I don't know. Going to find out. So the 9 are down here. Have you ever been left out? What's the first thing you want to do? You want to prove that he picked the wrong 3. That's what I would want to do. I'm a card-carrying disciple. I can do this. Now Jesus comes down and he rebukes them and calls them out. He says, why haven't you already done this? Clearly, he expects that this is something that they should be able to do. Just like when we were learning about the disciples in the boat, if Jesus is expecting that you now know how to do it and you can't, what do you need to do? You need to back up in the Bible and find out what just happened that would have equipped them to do it. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to back up, throw the car in reverse, and go back a few chapters. The disciples have missed something, but God love the disciples. I just love them because they really come off dumb as stumps sometimes. So remember, we've read this so many times that we anticipate everything in the story. But what has happened? What has just happened? Jesus has fed, we're going to go to Mark 8. Mark 8. Jesus has just fed the 4,000. So all the people come, and they don't have enough food. And Jesus says, well, we're going to feed them. The disciples are saying, well, where are we going to get the bread? They're crunching the numbers, quoting the facts, getting out the spreadsheet. Jesus, there's no food stores around here. And then Jesus has them all sit down, and he feeds them. Okay? And then he gets in a boat. And as he's leaving, the Pharisees come up to him. Did you guys see that in Mark 8? They come up to him and they're like, okay, so right now we're on verse 11, verse 12. The Pharisees came up and said, they began to question Jesus. To test him, they asked him for a sign from heaven. What? What just happened? He just fed 4,000, right? Well, we would like a sign for you to validate who you are. There's no sign. He's going to raise from the dead, and they're going to completely miss it. There's no sign that would translate to them. None. This is why Jesus refused to perform for his brothers, because no outward act is going to change inner faith. None. None. This whole story is about power and faith and what order they come in. We would like a sign. We'd like a sign. We'd like to see your action plan. Has anybody ever worked for a large corporation and you have a great idea, but there's no way that could ever happen because they've just legislated it into oblivion? Please fill out these 10 forms. And 3 months from now, somebody will look them over. Okay, well, I'm out. That's what they're trying to do to Jesus. They're saying, well, you're not really following the pre-structured setup for religion. And it's starting to annoy us because people are looking at you. All right. Then Jesus and his boys hop in the boat. They pull out. Now, you know that the boat is always time where Jesus has their full and complete attention, and he's going to start talking to them. And he says, what? Beware of the yeast of the Pharisees. So it says in 15, be careful, Jesus warned them. Watch out for the yeast of the Pharisees and that of Herod. Okay. Poor little small-brained disciples. Row, row, row. Okay. Well, we didn't bring any bread for us in this boat. Jesus must be talking about the bread that we left back there. And then Jesus, aware of what they're talking about, he said in verse 17, why are you talking about having no bread? Do you still not see or understand? Are your hearts hardened? Do you have eyes but fail to see and ears but fail to hear? And don't you remember when I broke the 5 loaves for the 5,000? How many basketfuls of pieces did you pick up? 12. And when I broke 7 loaves for the 4,000, how many basketfuls of pieces did you pick up? 7. And then he says, do you still not understand? Quite clearly the answer is yes, we still are lost. We don't know what's going on. Then Jesus goes on to heal a blind man. It's a beautiful story. And then we're going to zoom down to Mark 8:34. So people are glomming on to him. They want this magic power that he has. And so every time people started doing that, Jesus reminded them what was really going on. Then he called the crowd to him along with his disciples and said, whoever wants to be my disciple must deny themselves and take up their cross and follow me. For whoever wants to save their life will lose it, but whoever loses their life for me and for the gospel will save it. What good is it for someone to gain the whole world and forfeit their own soul? Mr. Robin Williams, one of my heroes. At the complete top, it's never enough. What can anyone give in exchange for their soul? All right. So that's what they've just heard. So when Jesus comes back down from the transfiguration, he comes down with the 3 guys who are completely speechless. Peter is very rarely speechless. Right? They're completely speechless, and they're kind of dumbfounded, and they walk up, and there's this big argument going on. Jesus had just said, beware of the yeast of who? The Pharisees and of Herod. Who are they engaged in discussion with? The exact people that Jesus just warned them about. Okay, so the Pharisees are concerned about the power, and they want to know where the power would come from. And that's what they're arguing about when Jesus walks up. He says, beware of the yeast of the Pharisees and the Sadducees. So when he speaks of Herod, that's referring to the Sadducees. You know, how can you lump those 2 groups together? Do you guys know who the Pharisees were? The Pharisees were the ultimate religious people. They were rule followers. They were so good at following rules that nobody could get anywhere close to them. And so that everybody knew that they were really good at following rules, they wore complete white in the desert, in the dirt. And then every time they said a prayer, they tied a knot so that these large strings would fall off of them, so that everywhere they went, people knew just exactly how much more superior in their religious walk they were to the average Joe, who certainly got dirty gutting a fish. Okay, and then over here we have Herod, we have the Sadducees. They were religious rulers that just wanted the status quo to stay the same. So they could put up with a whole bunch of religious shenanigans. We don't really care what you're doing as long as you don't bother Rome. Rome has put us in power, and we like that. So just calm down, hold your roll. That's basically what they were saying. So we have the Pharisees and Sadducees, and Jesus lumps them all together, complete polar opposites, and says, beware of their yeast. What is their yeast? I'm so glad you asked. We're going to read further. The Sadducees placed, and the Pharisees, the learned men, the religious rule followers, placed an emphasis on outward appearance. It was all about how I look to the world. Thus, they could decay on the inside. And that's why they were concerned about power, because power was distorting how people saw them. Jesus' power made them look weak. That's the one thing I can't. You could be a crackpot. You could talk away in the desert. I don't care. But if you're drawing my attention away from me, if you're changing the outward appearance of me, if I look weak and less than, that I can't handle. That is what they were upset about. And so they come up and they're arguing. And Jesus is going to take the Pharisees to school. could not stand them because he loved God's people. Jesus sums up the Pharisees in Matthew 23:5. All their works they do to be seen by men. They were so filled with pride that they could not see, that they would not practice what they preached. And that's what Jesus meant when he said in Matthew 23:3, for they say and do not do. You are all about talking the good talk, but you don't do it. And worse yet, in their perverse grab for power, they twisted God's righteous law to suit their needs and validate their outward appearance. And they increased the load. If you read some of the food laws that they had to handle without refrigeration, they increased the workload on the everyday man so there was no way that guy could succeed. I can't follow all the rules. There was literally 500 rules on how to prepare meat. The average guy was sinking. Matthew 23:13, but woe to you. And when Jesus says woe, you better back the truck up because God is saying, watch out. Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, for you shut up the kingdom of heaven. You make it so no one can get in. And I'm angry. He's so very, very mad at people who play church and make it so hard for the broken to understand how they can fit in. He says, woe to you, for you neither go in yourselves, but you don't allow anyone else in. So he comes down the mountain. His guys have completely failed. And he walks up and he goes, what are you doing? I just said, beware of these guys. And you were trying in your own strength to do a miracle because you weren't the three on the hill. And now you messed up. You didn't do it. So he says, this is what happens when he walks up. He talks, and who answers? What are you arguing about? All the disciples look at their feet. It's the father of the afflicted boy. He speaks up. He has no agenda other than to save his son. And Jesus says to them, you faithless people. Verse 9, how long must I be with you? How long must I put up with you? Okay, these are strong words. We've read them a kabillion times. But God is saying, I want to puke you out. How long do I have to stay here? Be hot, be cold. But you people in the middle are just mucking it up. Potentially, I feel strongly about that. You unbelieving and perverse generation, the root of perverse is to twist. To say something good and twist it. Perversion takes a good thing and makes it ugly. To twist. You unbelieving and perverse generation, how long shall I stay with you? Luke 9:41. So now Jesus, we're going to see a wheel inside a wheel. When God's telling a story, he tells a little story inside of a big story. When we were little kids, we saw the little story. Now we're going to take a step back and see the big story. This is about power and faith. How long has this been happening, Jesus says to the boy's father? Since he was a little boy. The Spirit often throws him into the fire, into the water, trying to kill him. Have mercy on us and help us if you can. If you can. What do you mean, if I can? Jesus asks. Anything is possible if a person believes. And now you have the order that everything has to go in. Belief, power. Belief, power. Can never be any other way. The word possible is translated from the Greek word dunamis. It's where we get the word dynamite. Power. It's used 120 times in the New Testament. Everybody was really concerned about power and who was wielding it. The Father articulates the problem. Heal him if you can. In Jesus' response, we also have the word dunamis. So the Father says, if you have the power, do it. And Jesus says, what do you mean if? Anything is possible. He doesn't say anything is possible because I'm God. What does he say? Anything is possible if a person believes. Who is he talking to? His boys. Then, in the most humble prayer, the dad cries out, I want to believe. Help me believe. God is not put off by honesty. He craves it. I want to do that. I want to be that, but I'm not there yet. And God's like, well, I'm in the helping business. Come a little bit closer. The crowd, do you guys see the crowd? The crowd is demanding, show us the power so that we can believe. God is saying, until you believe, you cannot access this power. Hebrews 11:6. And without faith, it is impossible to please God, because anyone who comes to him must believe that he exists and rewards those who earnestly seek him. John 3:18 and 19. Whoever believes in him is not condemned, but whoever does not believe stands condemned already, because they have not believed in the name of God's one and only Son. This is the verdict. The light has come into the world, but the people loved darkness instead of light, because their deeds were evil. So the crowd is saying, show us your power, thus we can believe in you. Jesus says, you must believe to receive power. The dad instantly picks it up because his agenda is so pure. I only want to take care of this kid. I can't believe on my own. Help me believe. Be wary of the yeast of the learned men, who keep up appearances and rot and decay on the inside. Jesus has equipped these guys to know it. Let's look back to Mark 8 for a minute. They're in the boat, right? Jesus warns them about the Pharisees, and then he brings up evidence to help the disciples understand. How many loaves did we start with when we fed the 5,000 boys? 5. How many baskets left over? 12. How many loaves did we start with when we fed the 4,000? Come on, guys. 7. How many baskets left over? 7. Don't you get it, guys? We fed more with less and had more left over because the power comes from God. Do the math. So if you read through all of the stuff that happens before this point, right after that conversation, Peter asked Jesus. Jesus turns to Peter and says, who do you think that I am? So it's a reminder of what happened in the boat the first time. And Peter responds, you're the Messiah. Score 1 for Pete. All right, you got it. The first disciple to say it out loud. All right. Unfortunately, Peter, my guy, was really good at sticking his foot in it. So a few minutes later, when Jesus is trying to tell them about the cross, Peter pulls Jesus aside and tries to give him some public relations advice. Because you know what happened? Every time Jesus talked about death, dying, and dying to yourself, the followers dropped off. And so Pete is saying, Jesus, we got to kind of tone down the talking about death stuff. On account of numbers are up, and we're trying to, get a thing going here. And Jesus turns to him and rebukes him and says, get behind me. Who? Satan. You do not have in mind the concerns of God, but merely human concerns. Oh, -1 for Peter. Oh, you broke even. You cannot serve God in the world. You can't. It's impossible. Beware of the yeast of the Pharisees. Once you become turned towards self, toward the world, toward crowd pleasing, toward self-pleasing, well, you will twist religion. That's perversity. You will twist religion to fit your need, and then your religion is impotent. It has no power, none at all, which is why exactly we can have a church on every corner and be effective as like wet paper mache. A lot of times I'm always like, how is it that I can drive past all of these churches and we're not making more of an impact? Oh, that's right. We're making this whole Christian thing fit what we needed to do. Many church scholars believe that the time of miracles was only for the New Testament time, and they'll teach you that. That once faith was established, we were to live on faith and no longer needed miracles to convince us. And they cited lack of miracles in the modern age as proof that their line of thinking was correct. John Wesley, probably a few of you have heard of him. John Wesley responded, "Why many works are not wrought now is not that faith is everywhere planted, but that unbelief everywhere prevails." You must believe, and then comes the power. You can't access the power without belief. You must get busy in slave world. You have such little faith, Jesus says. This type only comes out with much prayer. Later, he pulls them in. Because Jesus was never about shaming. He's about teaching and equipping. He says, look, guys, no miracle is ever mundane. We skipped over, because of time, Jesus healing the blind man, but he does it in 2 steps. Why does he do it in 2 steps? Well, he's showing the guys that I'm never going to heal a blind man the same way twice. Every miracle is personal. Persist in your faith. Keep moving. Galatians 5:7, the Apostle Paul says, "You are running a good race. Who cut it on you to keep you from obeying the truth?" So many of us are busy at church. But if we're not doing church work with God's motive, we're going to get our clock cleaned eventually. Exhibit A is 9 befuddled disciples who Jesus loved intensely. Have you ever come to church and found it a very irritating, annoying place to be? Just me? Okay. Because we've kind of changed things here in the Western world. We're kind of really about living the grasshopper lifestyle with ant morality. So we try to make them both work for us. I'm going to do this whole Christian thing as long as it's really working for me. Versus like, you must die to yourself. Well, that's just anti-American. We don't really do that. Social science is all over measuring how Americans can't really let go of anything. The United States now has 2.3 billion square feet of self-storage space. That's right, 2.3 billion square feet. The Self-Storage Association, just so you know, there is an association, notes that with more than 7 square feet is available for every man, woman, and child in the United States. It is now physically possible for every American to stand all at the same time under the total roofing of self-storage. That's something. 50% of self-storage renters are now simply storing what won't fit in their homes, even though the size of the average American house has almost doubled in the previous 50 years. The average house is 300 square feet. Whoa. I need to tell my husband that we are not even close to average. No wonder I have so much stuff. 15% of the customers told the Self-Storage Association that they were storing items that they no longer needed or wanted. I don't know. Between 1970 and 2008, disposable income ballooned. American families have on average twice as many possessions as they did 25 years ago. Twice as many. We doubled it in 25 years. What? I'm not making this stuff up. I was searching for why it is that we have so much stuff in our lives. And I came across this quote by Martin John Brown. He writes a blog called Alternate. It says, "It seems so easy to blame the ugly, consuming American for the storage boom, to see spending $50 or $150 a month to store junk as a spiritual failing unique to the United States. But Americans aren't storing junk, they're storing dreams of days when there will be a better house to move into, of days with time to read all those magazines and make all those recipes, of kids who honor family ties by keeping grandma's dresser, of doing things they once did again if only they could get interested. And it could be those kind of dreams aren't American, they're simply human." What we do really good as Christians is a lot of working. But what this story is asking us is, are we putting our work in the right place? Biblical scholars talk about this story and why it is the disciples failed. And one of the things that is pointed out by guys who know stuff is that this is the first time the disciples are trying to do something without Jesus. And he's marking a transition. My time with you is coming to an end. My physical body will not be here, and you're going to need to do things differently, guys. He was saying, when I'm not here, you can't just show up on game day. You're going to have to do a whole lot of work before you get to game day. Last fall, my 12-year-old, who's a 7th grader, went out for football. And you guys living here know that we've seen a whole lot of football success recently. And he came home, like the first couple days, I wasn't getting a lot of words out of him. And then he just had a meltdown. And he looked at me and he goes, "I hate football." Okay, this is like a weekend to the practices. And I'm like, what is going on? Talk to me. I'm like the mom trying to get verbal stuff out of a 12-year-old boy. You know, it's not happening. And he goes, I hate it. And I'm like, why do you hate it? Is the coach saying mean things? Are the boys saying mean things? I went all the places the mom goes. He's like, no. Like so irritated that I was asking these questions. And he goes, all we do is run around and hit things. And I'm like, okay, what were you thinking football was? He was thinking it was the Seahawks. He was thinking that it was riding on a parade with 600,000 people in attendance cheering for you. On some level, that had filtered in, and what he didn't know is that every one of those players have put in years of running and hitting things. We as Christians read these Bible verses and we figure that we're just going to show up on game day and boom, the power is going to be there. And when it's not, we're like, well, either God didn't keep his promises, or those of us that are good Christians, we figure out a million ways to bash ourselves but not actually change. Now we're going to talk about something hard. It's called fasting. It's the antidote to having a soul so cluttered that there's no way for God to get his power to you. Fasting is a freaky thing that nobody really wants to talk about in the church, because why? It hits right in the center of your self-serving need. I do not want to die to myself, and I don't want to do any sort of practice that teaches me how. Thank you very much. I'll sign up to work in the 2-year-old classroom instead. Here's what fasting is. Fasting is unplugging from the world. You cannot fast unless you've figured out what silence and solitude is, so God can actually start teaching you who he is and who you are in relation to him. You're in his boat, he's not in yours. Okay. Then you're moving forward, and secrecy teaches you how big the pull of the world is. I just love to be liked. Please like me, please validate me, please tell me, please pet me. Lady at the Lancome counter is slightly rude. She must think I'm ugly. My day is over. Okay? Satan doesn't even work that hard. Now, you've pushed through those two and spend time there. Now you're going to come to 401 practice. This is hard stuff. Fasting. There's a whole lot of stuff in your book about it, because people can mess this stuff up, and I don't want you to hurt yourselves. But all fasting is pulling the plug on your need to hold on to everything. So, talked a little bit about the writing about fasting from earrings. I know, how simple, how powerful. What a huge place for God to get a wedge into my life and start growing from there. In the Bible, fasting refers to going without food and or water. But here in this world, in this time, fasting can be, it's anytime you're unplugging yourself from something that's not bad, but it just might be sort of starting to dominate. So I have to go on fasts from what? My phone. I have to go on fast from Pinterest. So hard to fall asleep without it, okay? I have to pull myself away from Facebook. I have to say, this is something that's kind of taking over an extreme amount, and I'm just going to take a step back. Because the world has so much lovely stuff. It has tons and tons of stuff. And I like it, and I want it all. But it's just like stopping at McDonald's on the way to Thanksgiving dinner and arriving completely full of French fries. Well, I really don't want to eat that great food you have in front of me, but I'm just going to sit here and fellowship with you guys. That is how we enter church. Oh, pretty much taking care of all my own needs, but going to go pay the worship bill. All right. So we love our stuff. Here's my internet. Okay. There's some television shows I can't go without, right? All right. Then I like to read the internet, blogs. Okay, those kind of go together. All right. So I think I can get one more in here. Okay. All right. So this is how I'm walking around. Now God's got a job for me to do. Oh, wait. Okay. Got it, Lord. I'm driving to Awana. I'm ready. Bring it. Okay, every time I'm driving home, wow, those kids were really wild. Okay, you know what fasting is? That's all it is. Unplugging. Allowing God to create some room in your soul to give you the good stuff. We're going to shift gears now. We're going to start going into the disciplines of advancement. But until you've created some space, there's no room. That is why when people told you for years and years and years, well, you just pray about that. You pray about it, read the Bible, claim some promises, and you go do it. And you went and you showed up and it hurt. And it was hard. And you went home thinking, wow, I'd rather do just about anything but serve God tomorrow. You know why? Because you were doing it all in your own strength. And you didn't even really know because you're so addicted to you. What Jesus was telling his disciples is, you cannot ever perform anything without doing a lot of work in the background, getting to know who I am and whose boat you're in. Once you know, then you can believe, and then, here comes the power. Quit putting it in the other order. We can't stand like the crowd and say, well, God, if you just give me this promotion, I will. Okay, you guys probably never talked to yourself like this, but Lord, I know the whole quiet time thing's a little sketchy, but just help me through this one thing. And we're just gonna go great guns. Okay, that's not how God works. He says, get to know me. Let me transform you, and then you will be so filled with me that you'll live different. But you can't make yourself live different so that you get more God. It will never work that way. And that's what a lot of us have done for decades of regular church attendance. Why is it that the Western church is not very effective? We haven't spent a lot of time unplugging from our world, and we don't even see its hold over us. Jesus was directly questioned about fasting, and he did not release his disciples from the practice. He said, when, not if. When you do this, when I leave, you're going to need to do this. It's going to be so hard to understand where you stop and where the pull of your culture starts, that until you embrace some of these disciplines of abstinence, some of the things of pulling back and making room, they're terrifying for those people like me who run off of synergy, who like to be busy, who don't want to think deep. These type of things are terrifying. But until I started doing them, God couldn't get me to the place when I read those verses, I will give you wings like eagles, where I actually could. It was just a really good sentiment. Your faith is not a coffee cup slogan. It's real. But unless you do it in the read and do format, he can't get you to the real, because you're stuffed with French fries. It seems so silly when we look at the disciples. Well, I guess he's talking about the bread that we left behind. Jesus is saying, everything that you've ever wanted or thought you wanted is available to you. You don't have to wait till heaven to get it, but you do have to unplug from your culture that's informing you of how to live, and let me transform you. That is the definition of transformation. You allow him to work from the inside out. Fasting doesn't move your prayers to the top of the file. Fasting does not manipulate God. Fasting does not make you a super Christian. And if you walk around torturing the people around you because you are fasting, you're doing it wrong. And you've been paid in full. So if you like being hungry or bored or longing or jonesing for the internet and making sure that everyone knows, well then, mission accomplished. Fasting is private, it is very humble, and it's between you and God, and you're not going to get any payback from the world because it's the antithesis of worldly payback. So if you try to mix the two, it's not going to work, and that's why fasting, a lot of us have tried fasting, and we're like, I'm out. Okay, because we started with the wrong motive, which was, hey, you guys, I'm fasting, right? Try it with a few friends. I've tried it with friends, and we fasted from all kinds of crazy stuff. One friend has a particular sandwich at Starbucks that she cannot not eat every morning. And she would text me the whole week she was fasting from it. I'm so hungry for my sandwich. But God was showing her that he wanted more space in her mind and life in a functional and practical way. I like what John Piper has to say about fasting. he has to say that, I'm just kind of paraphrasing his quote because I don't have it in front of me. I kind of lost all my notes. But what he said is, it's not horrid wickedness that's choking the life out of America. It's apple pie. It's comfort. It's just watching a few shows before bed. It's making sure that you're never really uncomfortable. And you numb yourself more and more and more and more until God's voice is unhearable. And if you stay in that position, you slip like Saul into a way of twisting the truth, and it makes sense to you twisted. Get together with a group of friends and dig into this one. Start small and build up. Fasting at the very beginning is all about understanding the pull of the world and what is having mastery over you. But fasting, regularly practice, pushes into a whole other sweet space where he can equip you ahead of time for whatever's coming up. Can he really do that? Mm-hmm. Is it pretty awesome sauce? Yes. Do I have any idea how to explain to people how to do it? No. Because it's a journey between you and God, but it's one he doesn't want you to miss. Let's pray. Dear Heavenly Father, wow, thank you so much for these 3 great stories on how not to do it. I can't wait, Lord, to start pressing in to slave world and seeing how sweet life can be. But before we move on, let's just stand here with the disciples. Their first foray off on their own, and they failed because they didn't understand what they were doing. They didn't understand where it came from, and they didn't understand how to stay plugged into God. That most games are won off the field of play in serious preparation. When, Lord, when did we ever start believing that Christianity would be any easier than learning to knit or golfing? We're so good at making a plan and a strategy for learning something or doing something hard. But then when it comes to Christianity, we just want to phone it in because it's just a Sunday morning thing. It's who we are. It's what we do. It's stop before Costco. Lord, wake us up. Show us that this is a real thing. You are a real God with real work for us to do. And you have all of the power to do it. And you want to get it to us. But we're going to have to lay down the stuff that this world has filled us full of every day, every day, every day in slave world. Thank you, God, so much for being with us this evening. I know these are some hard truths, but your girls can take it because we love you. Please move us into that next thing that you have for us. And we lay all of this at your feet because you are more than able to take each one of us in our individual lives. Just like that dad who said, help me, I want to do that. You're right here. You're in the helping business. In your Son's powerful name, by whom we have the authority to call you friend. Amen.